The silver threading in the rope had opened the skin on Zora's wrists sometime during the second night, and by the third morning she had stopped checking. The wounds were there, or they weren't. Either way, the rope stayed. She knelt on the cold stone floor of Ironspire's great hall, not because anyone had told her to kneel, but because the length of rope connecting her wrists to the iron ring bolted into the floor gave her no other option. Standing pulled her arms upward at an angle that became unbearable after 20 minutes. Sitting required her to fold herself sideways in a way that left her neck crooked against the stone. Kneeling was the only position that distributed the discomfort evenly enough to survive. She had become expert at surviving discomfort. Above her, the banners of 5-pack territories hung from the gallery rafters, each one freshly pressed, the dyes bright and sharp, smelling in the cold air. Tomorrow their alphas would stand beneath those banners and sign the Ironspire Accords, the treaty that would end 10 years of border war between the northern territories, 10 years of raids and displaced packs, and burning farmland and wolves who had grown up knowing nothing but the smell of smoke. Tomorrow, Alpha King Rark of Ironspire would sign those accords as an Unbound Alpha. She was the reason why. The treaty language was specific. An Alpha signing on behalf of his territory had to be free of the mate bond. The Council of Treaty Advisors had been clear about this, and Zora had to admit, in the quiet and slightly hysterical part of her mind, that she had developed for exactly these situations, that she understood the logic. A bonded Alpha had divided loyalty. An Alpha with a mate made decisions filtered through the imperative to protect her. The other 4 signing Alphas needed assurance that Rourke would honor the accords equally across all territories, not just the ones closest to his mate's family or her home pack. If she'd had one. She didn't. Her home pack was gone. The Duskfen wolves had been absorbed 3 years ago after losing a border dispute that had never really been about borders. It had been about the underground springs on the eastern ridge and who controlled the water access in drought years, and the Duskfen Alpha had made a bad gamble and lost. The pack had been distributed, some absorbed into Ironspire, some into the Greyvale pack to the south. Zora had been brought to Ironspire as part of the absorbed population. She was a healer. A good one. She had been given a workroom in the castle's lower level, a cot, a small window that looked out at the courtyard, and access to the medicinal garden. She had thought that was her life now. She had not been thinking about the rope. 4 nights ago, a man named Edan, the chief treaty advisor, a broad-shouldered wolf with the permanent expression of someone who smelled something unpleasant, had come to her workroom at 2 in the morning without knocking. He had come in while she was grinding dried yarrow root and stood in the doorway with 2 guards behind him and told her she was the Alpha King's fated mate. She had set down the pestle very carefully. She had said, "That's not possible." Eden had smiled with his mouth and not his eyes, and said it was quite possible, confirmed through bloodwork comparison, and the bond had apparently activated during the past month when Roark had visited the lower levels for a medical issue she had treated. She remembered that visit. A silver-tipped arrow had grazed his forearm in a training exercise. She had cleaned and dressed the wound while he sat on her workroom table and looked at the ceiling as though the ceiling owed him money. She had not thought about it since. Apparently, something else had. Eden had explained the treaty requirement, the denouncement ceremony. She would be displayed in the Great Hall before the assembled Alphas, and Rourke would formally state before witnesses that no mate bond existed between them, that the bloodwork result was an error, that she was a null blood with no wolf spirit and therefore incapable of a true mate bond. The statement, once spoken before all 5 treaty Alphas, would be written into the Accords as legal fact. Permanent, binding under pack law across all 5 territories. A denouncement wasn't rejection, it was erasure. Once spoken inside the formal treaty language, no court in any of the 5 territories would ever recognize a bond claim from her. regardless of what her blood said. "What happens to me after?" she had asked. "You'll be relocated, Southern Territories. I have a workroom here, patients. Someone else will treat them." She had looked at him for a long time. "And if I refuse?" His expression didn't change. "The treaty doesn't get signed." The border disputes resume. The Harwick Pack has already positioned soldiers at the eastern ridge. Without the accords, they move on the water access by spring. Ironspire goes to war. Greyvale follows because they're treaty-bound to Ironspire. Estimated casualties in the first engagement. He paused. "I can give you the numbers if they'd help." They would not help. She already knew what war looked like. "No," she said, "that's fine." She had let them tie the rope. There was one woman she recognized from the kitchen level, a small, quick-moving wolf named Bina, who had slipped her a cup of broth through the narrow gap at the bottom of the holding room door on the second night, without a word, without waiting for thanks, just the cup and then the sound of footsteps retreating. Zora had held it for a long time before drinking, because it was warm and the floor was cold, and she was trying to hold on to every sensation that wasn't pain. She spotted Bina now on a ladder, adjusting a banner. Their eyes met briefly. Bina looked away first. Her jaw was tight. The rope had silver thread woven through it. Zora had noticed this on the first night, when the burning didn't fade the way rope friction should have. Silver only burned wolves with active wolf blood. She knew this because she had spent 3 years treating silver burns. She had not known, until 3 nights ago, that she was capable of having them. She had been registered as null blood at 12. A traveling registry officer had come through the Duskfen compound, tested all the children. The test was simple. A treated paper strip pressed to a blood drop from her fingertip. The strip was supposed to change color. Hers had stayed blank. The officer had written null blood, no wolf spirit detected on her card and moved on. She had believed it for 13 years, because why wouldn't she? Except she had dreamed of running since she was a child, on 4 legs, through open land, fast in a way her human body had never been. She had assumed it was a common enough dream. She had not questioned it. Except the silver was burning her wrists. She was still turning this over, the systematic, quiet wrongness of it, when the main doors of the great hall opened. The scent that came in with the draft had no name she recognized. Sharp pine resin and cold stone, and something underneath both of those, electric, like the air 3 seconds before lightning. It hit her like stepping off a ledge. Her stomach dropped, her vision blurred at the edges, and something at the center of her chest lurched hard, like a door being pulled open from the wrong side. Whatever was curled in her bones, whatever had been burning her wrists for 3 days, lifted its head. She did not look up. She heard the footsteps, not processional, not ceremony, long strides, covering ground the way someone covers ground when they're looking for something and not finding it. The footsteps slowed, stopped about 10 feet from her. Why is there a person in rope restraints in my signing hall? It wasn't a question. The voice was low and rough-edged, the kind that came from deep in the chest, and it reverberated off the stone walls in a way that made the hall feel smaller. She felt it in the back of her teeth. She didn't look up. She'd been told not to meet his eyes. Eden had been specific. Eye contact would accelerate the bond formation, make the denouncement harder. I asked you a question. Closer now. She could see his boots from her downward angle. Dark leather, worn smooth at the toe from use. The laces were military style, double knotted. There was a smear of mud on the left boot, still damp at the edge. He had come from outside, from the training grounds maybe, not from his chambers, not dressed for ceremony. I heard you, she said. Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to. I'm waiting to see if answering will make my situation better or worse. A silence. Then, almost despite itself, a short sound, half exhale, half something that was not quite a laugh. Fair, he said. Answer anyway. She looked up. The Alpha King of Ironspire was not what the servants described. She had heard intimidating and cold, and the kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice. She had built a picture in her mind, composed, severe, handsome, in the deliberate way of people who know they'll be painted for posterity. Rourke looked like someone who had forgotten he was going to be painted for posterity. His hair was dark and needed cutting, falling forward across his forehead. There was a fresh bruise along his jaw from sparring, and his shirt was the plain, dark cotton of a training session, untucked at the back. The expression on his face was not cold, it was tightly controlled, which was different. Cold meant the feeling wasn't there. This was the face of someone containing a great deal of feeling with considerable effort. His eyes were dark amber. They were doing a rapid, comprehensive assessment of her. The rope, the burns at her wrists where silver thread had eaten into skin, the awkward kneeling position, the bruise on her temple where she'd slept against stone wrong. His jaw tightened, the muscle at the hinge of it jumped once. "Who ordered this?" he said. "The treaty requires that you appear unbound. Your advisors determined I was." She stopped, started again. "The bond triggered. When I treated your wound last month, the advisors found out they needed to contain it before the signing." He crouched down in front of her. At eye level, he was still somehow imposing in a way that wasn't threatening. Not directed at her, his hands hung loose between his knees, large, scarred across the knuckles, working hands. "You're the healer," he said, from the lower workroom. "Yes. You fixed my arm. I cleaned and dressed a graze wound. It wasn't complicated." He looked at her wrists, at the rope, at the precise placement of the silver threading, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. "They put silver in the restraints," he said. "Yes. Silver burns wolves with active blood." She met his eyes, held them. "I know." Something moved through his expression, a sequence of realizations arriving one after another, like stones dropping into still water. "They told me you were null blood," he said. "The registry says I am. But the silver burns you." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then quieter than before. "What's your name?" "Zora." "Zora." He said it the way you say something you're pressing into memory. "How long have you been in this hall?" 3 days. His hands, which had been loose, tightened slightly. Not into fists, just a gathering of tension that wanted to move somewhere and was being held back. "Don't go anywhere," he said. His mouth curved slightly at his own words, a short, dark acknowledgement of the obvious. He stood. "I need to speak to Eden. I'll be back. If anyone touches the restraints before I return, scream. I'll hear it." He left through the side entrance. She listened to his footsteps, quick, purposeful, not quite running. Bina had come down from the ladder and was standing near the far wall with a carefully neutral expression that wasn't quite managing it. "He looked angry," she said across the distance. "He looked like he was deciding something," Zora said. "Those are the same thing with him." A pause. "You going to be all right?" Zora looked at her wrists, at the blood-dried brown into the threading. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. He came back before midnight, through the side entrance carrying 2 things, a cup of water and a cloth bundle she couldn't identify until he was close enough to smell it. Calendula salve, the same preparation she kept in her own workroom. He had gone to her workroom. He crouched in front of her, held the water cup while she drank, both hands tied. She couldn't hold it herself, and watched her with that expression she still had no clean name for. Steady, complicated, barely controlled. "I spoke to the full council tonight," he said when the cup was empty. He set it down, started unwrapping the salve, told them I won't be making the formal denouncement tomorrow. Her stomach dropped. "Rock. Let me finish." He took her right wrist, turned it over, began applying the salve to the burns with the focused precision of someone who had learned carefulness from necessity. Eden told me that if I refuse, the Harik pack uses the absence of the Accords as cause to advance on the eastern ridge by spring. He wasn't wrong about the military situation. A pause. He was wrong about the cause. She watched him work. The salve was warm and smelled right, and the burning in her wrists eased in a way that made her exhale without meaning to. The treaty language requires I sign as an unbound alpha, no mate bond, no divided loyalty, he continued. The interpretation being used is that any bond makes me partial, but that interpretation isn't in the original text. He glanced up. I had a legal officer pull the founding accords tonight, 3 hours ago. 45 minutes to find the relevant clause. She waited. The original language says unencumbered, not unbonded. Unencumbered, free of conflicts of interest, not free of personal bonds. The denouncement ceremony was added 80 years ago by an elder council that had reasons for wanting mated alphas politically weakened. It's been treated as original law ever since because no one checked. He finished with the salve moved to her left wrist. Someone checked tonight. One legal officer, 3 hours before the signing. He's thorough. Rourke. She said his name the way you say a word when you need a person to feel the weight of it. If you're wrong, if the other alphas reject your interpretation, there is no treaty. Then we negotiate until there is one. He looked at her steadily. I'm not speaking the denouncement. What I am going to do is walk into that hall tomorrow and sign my name to a treaty that doesn't require me to cut my mate out of my own chest in exchange for peace. The bond, the thing she had been carefully not thinking about for 3 days, surged. She pressed her lips together. You don't know me, she said. I know you're good at your work. I know you didn't fight the restraints because someone told you thousands of people would die if you did, and you believed them, and you sat here for 3 days. He paused, and I know the silver burns you, which means the registry was wrong, which means someone made it wrong. She had been sitting with this for 3 days. The cold-handed registry officer, the test strip that had stayed blank, the specific compound she'd read about in a medical text, something that could be applied to the strip to neutralize the reagent. Rare, expensive, something you'd have to obtain deliberately. My mother was a healer, she said slowly. She died when I was 9. She was very good. She could close wounds that didn't respond to normal treatment. Silver poisoning, bone fractures, systemic infections, the kind of cases other healers couldn't manage. She paused. Duskfen Pack lost their healer 8 years before I was born. My mother appeared and offered her skills in exchange for pack membership. No one knew where she came from. What was her name? Lyawan. She felt the recognition move through him before his expression changed. A small stillness, a slight widening of focus. The Silver Mark line, he said. There was a healer bloodline in the old Northern Territories. Silver Mark. They carried a trait, accelerated wolf healing, almost impossible to suppress paired with a therapeutic gift. The last known Silvermark healer disappeared from records approximately 30 years ago. He looked at her, about 9 years before you were tested and registered as null blood. My mother disappeared when I was 9, Zora said. The Duskfen Alpha told me it was illness. I always thought. She stopped. I stopped thinking about it. Silvermark wolves shift late, Rourke said. Their wolves stay dormant longer than standard development. And when they do manifest, he paused, have you ever dreamed of running? On 4 legs, in open country. She looked at him. Fast, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of this since she was 7 years old. She had never told anyone. Yes, she said. That's not a common dream. That's a dormant wolf pressing against the limit of what's been suppressing it. He stood slowly. Something had changed in his face. The controlled expression had become something more precise, more sure. I'm going to speak to Oswald tonight. Elder Oswald, the only council member who hasn't deferred to Edan's interpretation of the treaty language. Why him? Because he's been in 3 conversations with Edan this week about you. and every time he walks away from them, he goes directly to the chapel and stays there for an hour. He picked up the cloth and the cup. A man who needs that much prayer after routine administrative discussions isn't at peace with the routine. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. "I'm going to break those ropes tomorrow," he said, before the signing, in front of every alpha in that hall. "I need you to know that, so tonight isn't only waiting." She looked at him, at the untucked shirt and the training bruise and the hands that had just applied salve to her burns with the care of someone doing something they intended to get right. What if it doesn't work? If the other alphas reject the reinterpretation? "Then I figure it out." He said it the way people say things they've already decided, but it's going to work. He left. Bina appeared from the shadows, crossed the hall, and draped a blanket around Zora's shoulders without comment or ceremony. She sat with her until the candles burned low and Zora finally slept. They came before dawn to prepare her. 2 women from Eden's staff, efficient and impersonal, who adjusted the rope restraints to run through a second-floor ring, the visual positioning of someone on display. They didn't speak to her. She watched them work with the detached clarity of someone who has been awake most of the night, turning over the same question from every possible angle and still arriving at the same answer. The hall filled, pack representatives, court officials, formal witnesses. Then the 5 signing alphas in a procession that filled the space with compressed authority, 4 strangers and Renwick of Harwick, a big weathered wolf who moved through halls with the ease of a man who assumed rooms belonged to him. Then Roark. He entered from the main doors, and the noise in the hall didn't stop exactly but changed register, lowered, tightened. He was dressed for the signing. Dark formal jacket, the Ironspire seal at his throat. His hair had been trimmed since last night, she noticed. Not groomed into ceremony. Just trimmed. He still looked like himself. He didn't look at her as he walked to the signing table. She understood why. She watched him reach the table, exchange formal greetings, take his position opposite the other 4 alphas. Eden stepped forward with the treaty scroll. "Before the signing proceeds," he said, voice carrying with the projection of a man who had practiced being heard, "the Ironspire Accords require that Alpha King Rock confirm his unencumbered status before witnesses." He turned towards Zora. "There exists a possible bond interference. Standard treaty protocol demands it be addressed formally." He began the language of the denouncement. The formal words, archaic and specific, the ones she had been told, would strip the bond from legal recognition permanently, make her claim unrecognizable in any court, in any of the 5 territories for the rest of her life. Rock let him finish the preamble. Then he said no. The single word landed in the hall like a stone in still water, and the silence that spread outward from it had weight. Eden went very still, Alpha King. "The language of the founding accords uses unencumbered," Roark said. His voice was even, not loud. It didn't need to be. The hall was quiet enough that everyone in it could hear him clearly. "I have the original document. My legal officer confirmed the translation last night. The denouncement ceremony was added to this ritual 80 years ago and is not part of the original treaty requirements." He looked at the 4 visiting alphas, one by one. "I'm not making a denouncement. I am prepared to sign the accords under the original founding language and discuss the 80-year amendment separately." Renwick of Harwick spoke first. "You're trying to reinterpret a ceremony that's been standard for 3 generations. I'm identifying what the actual text says versus what 3 generations of council interpretation has layered on top of it." Roark set the legal document his officer had prepared on the signing table. "Read it." Renwick looked at it, did not pick it up. The Thornfield Alpha leaned forward, took the document, read it again, set it back down with something careful in his expression. "There's a second matter," Roark said. He turned, and this time he looked at her, directly across the full length of the hall. The wolf in the restraints. She's been registered as null blood. The registration is incorrect. She has active wolf blood, which anyone can confirm by looking at the silver burns on her wrists from the silver-threaded rope she has been held with for 3 days. His voice stayed even. Underneath it, she could hear what that cost him. She is the daughter of a Silver Mark line healer. Her wolf has been dormant, not absent, and she was deliberately misregistered as null blood 13 years ago by someone who wanted her classified as valueless and untraceable. The hall was very quiet. Eden said, "This is not." Oswald, Rourke looked at the elder. Elder Oswald stood from his seat at the council table. He was thin, older than most of the council, with the particular stillness of someone who had made peace with an uncomfortable decision and was now executing it. "I'll confirm," he said. "I was shown documentation 40 years ago suggesting the Duskfen Pack had been paid to register a child as null blood and keep her untraceable. I didn't act on it. I've been thinking about that decision for a long time." He paused. "I'd like to stop thinking about it now." The silence changed texture. Rourke walked the length of the hall, past the signing table, past the 4 visiting alphas, past Eden, who stood rigid and said nothing. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the rope, at her wrists, at her face. "May I?" he said. He was asking. In front of everyone, in the moment she had been dreading for 4 days, he stopped and asked. "Yes," she said. He took the main rope in both hands and pulled. The silver threading screamed. She heard it differently than she expected. Not the snap of breaking, but a sustained sound. The sound of something being forced through a limit it was not built to withstand. His arms shook with it. His jaw clenched. The rope resisted, and then gave way in a rush, the end whipping back against the floor hard enough to strike sparks from the stone. Her arms came free. The relief was so sudden she swayed. His hand caught her elbow, immediate, steady. He removed the floor attachment next, then worked the wrist restraints off with the focus of someone doing something they would remember precisely and forever. When the last of the rope fell, she stood. Her legs held. Something was building inside her. She had felt it since last night, since the moment Rourke had said your wolf has been dormant, not absent, a pressure she had no previous experience with, a heat gathering in the center of her chest, in the marrow of her bones. She had felt it before, she understood now, in the dream, running on 4 legs through open country, fast and free and enormous. She had just never recognized it when she was awake. "I don't know how to do this," she said, quietly, only for him. "I don't think it needs to be done," he said. "I think it's already happening." The shift came the way the dream always felt, not transformation but remembering, stepping into a shape that had always been there, waiting for her to find it. The light didn't explode. It gathered, concentrated, and then released, a steady wave that moved through the hall from floor to gallery, warm rather than blinding, the color of winter sunlight through deep water. When it cleared, the wolf standing in the center of Ironspire's great hall was the color of glacier ice. Not white, not transparent, but something between. She could see the stone floor faintly through her own pores, like glass that had learned to be solid. And her eyes, when she turned her gaze to the room, reflected the amber of the hall lights back in silver. The hall was absolutely still. Every wolf in the room had gone still, not from her dominance, not alpha pressure, not a command. Something else. Something that moved through the space like a hand pressed flat to a drum. A presence that spoke to whatever was old in wolf blood. Older than pack hierarchy, older than territorial law. The feeling of standing in front of something that the world had decided mattered, whether or not the world had been paying attention. Eden hadn't moved. He stood where Rourke had passed him, and something had happened to his face. The composure was still there. It was the kind that went all the way down, built over years, but beneath it, something had given way. Not guilt. Understanding. the specific, quiet collapse of a man who has just comprehended that the structure he built his certainty on was always wrong. He had believed she was null blood. He had genuinely believed the denouncement was necessary. He had done everything correctly according to a system that had been feeding him false information for 40 years. She shifted back. The hall waited. She turned to Renwick of Harwick, who had not spoken since Rourke read the legal document aloud. He was not a stupid man. His jaw worked. The silver mark line was supposed to be gone, he said. Not accusation, more like a thing he was confirming for himself. I know, she said. He picked up the treaty pen and signed his name. The other 4 alphas followed. Rourke signed last. Eden was not exiled and was not jailed. Zora made this decision herself, and it was the one the council argued about longest. What Eden received was correction. He was removed from his position and reassigned to the blood registry audit that Oswald oversaw. Every null blood classification in Ironspire territory tested again with untampered reagent strips, every false registration personally reviewed. It was, as Oswald noted dryly in the first council session, more work than exile and would take years. Eden accepted the reassignment without appeal. He was a man who had run a system he believed was correct, and had been shown, in the most public possible way, that it wasn't. Zora thought he would do the audit well. She thought it would cost him, and she thought that was appropriate, and she thought it was enough. Oswald resigned from the Elder Council. His resignation letter was 2 sentences long. He spent the following months locating every administrative record connected to the original misregistration until he found the name of the person who had paid for it, an elder who had died 12 years ago and could not answer for any of it. Zora received this information on a grey morning in late autumn, sitting in her workroom with the window cracked and the smell of wood smoke coming in from the village chimneys. She read Oswald's report twice. Then she set it down and sat with the particular quality of silence that follows the discovery that the person responsible for a long injustice is already gone, and all the anger you saved for them has nowhere to go. Rourke found her there an hour later. He didn't knock. They had stopped knocking weeks ago, and he sat across from her at the workroom table without asking what was wrong, because he'd already felt it through the bond. The growing precision of it still surprised her, the way their moods transferred like heat through a shared wall. Gone already, he said. 12 years. He was quiet. He reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb moved over her wrist, over the scar tissue where the rope had been, which had healed fast and clean in the way Silvermark blood healed. The way she had watched her mother's patients heal, not understanding for 23 years why she couldn't do the same thing until now. My parents died when I was 9, she said. I never got to ask my mother what she was running from. No, she said, I know. I'm going to feel that for a long time. I know that too. Outside, the wolf she had finally become ran the edges of her mind like a current. Always present now, close to the surface. She could feel it the way she could feel her own heartbeat. Constant, warm, hers. She looked at Rourke across the table, at the scar on his jaw, at the fresh cut on his left hand from the training yard this morning, at the fraying cuff of his shirt which he kept patching and which she had decided she was never going to mention because she liked it unreasonably. I want to ask you something, she said. He waited. She placed his hand on her stomach, low, flat, warm. He went completely still. His breath stopped for 1 full second. She felt the bond detonate, joy and terror and protectiveness slamming through it in a wave that flooded them both, and she watched his face come undone in a way she had never seen it do, all the careful control simply leaving, replaced by something vast and unguarded. When, he managed. Early, very early, she met his eyes. I can feel it like a second heartbeat alongside mine. Smaller. The wolf woke up to it this morning. He didn't say anything. He stood, came around the table, crouched in front of her, and pressed his forehead to hers the way wolves did. The oldest greeting, the one that meant "I know you and I am here," and she put her hand against his jaw and felt his pulse under her palm and breathed him in. The rope scars on her wrists had turned silver, not the silver of damage, the silver of the silver mark line, surfacing in healed skin the way bloodline traits emerged, slowly, correctly, in their own time. She had read about it in a medical text months ago, not knowing it applied to her. The text called it the wolf's signature, silver in the scar tissue, visible proof of what the blood was capable of doing when it was finally allowed to. In the great hall 50 feet away, the floor ring where the rope had been anchored still sat embedded in the stone. Rourke had ordered it left, the severed rope still bolted to it, the silver threading still visible in the braid. Not removed, not covered, not explained away, left exactly where it was, so that the record was clear and complete and could not be quietly rewritten by anyone who found it inconvenient. The morning light came through the workroom window and found the silver in her wrists and caught it, and for a moment she held very still, watching the light do what it did. Then Rourke's hand closed warm over both of hers, and she let herself be held.